Thousands took to the streets of Addis Ababa on Tuesday to escort the body of a murdered singer to his hometown. Hachalu Hundessa, a popular musician known for his political protest songs, was killed on Monday night. That's enraged youths who burned tires in the capital and took to the streets in other cities. Unrest spreading through the heartlands of Prime Minister Abiy Ahmed's support. Hachalu's music was the soundtrack to the movement that brought Abiy to power, and he has appealed for calm. While Abiy's rule has ushered in greater political and economic freedoms, it's also led to an increase in unrest in a country made up of more than 80 ethnic groups. A prominent Oromo opponent of Abiy, media tycoon Jawar Mohammed, was arrested on Tuesday, a TV station he owns said, after his bodyguards refused to disarm. Jawar has spearheaded a backlash against Abiy's determination to forge a pan-Ethiopian politics. Telecoms across the country have also been shut down, a step authorities have taken in the past at times of political unrest. Police say Hachalu, a former political prisoner, was shot dead at around 9:30 in the evening and that some suspects have been arrested. Abiy has offered his condolences and promised an investigation.
He's young and charismatic, and he's won a Nobel Peace Prize. But there's no rose without a thorn, and protests in Abiy Ahmed's Ethiopia have led to almost 100 deaths in the last month, an alarming reality that needs explaining. For starters, Abiy Ahmed's Nobel moment came after the 43-year-old had been in power for just 18 months. During this brief time, he ended the long-standing border war with Eritrea, he released thousands of political prisoners, he appointed women to half his cabinet posts, and he even ended a confrontation with a bunch of military officers by simply doing push-ups. And so he was awarded this prestigious prize based on his, quote, efforts to achieve peace and reconciliation. But at the same time, peace and reconciliation in Ethiopia are quickly eroded, leading to speculation that the Nobel was a premature move for a man who still hasn't passed the test of time. The deaths have been characterized as, quote, ethnic violence, with dozens of victims being identified based on their religion and creed. But beyond the intricate social fabric of the country, we need to delve into the actions of one of Abiy Ahmed's rivals, Jawar Mohammed, to uncover the political dimension of this so-called ethnic violence. The violence in recent protests was actually sparked by Jawar Mohammed, who claimed that police in Addis Ababa had surrounded him and tried to detain him. But who is he? Jawar is a US citizen. Apart from being an analyst and activist, he's the founder of the Oromia Media Network and was the lead organizer of the protest in 2016 and the intellectual force behind the International Oromo Youth Association. It was these protests and the powerful collective of youth that sparked the wave of anti-government demonstrations which brought Abiy Ahmed to power in 2018. Abiy and Jawar also happen to be members of the country's largest ethnic group, the Oromo, but the theoretical alliance that was established has been seemingly broken. Why? Well, Jawar Mohammed has already hinted that he will be running against Abiy Ahmed in the 2020 elections. He has also rallied his own base to rise up against Abiy, who despite the Nobel win, has been characterized by Jawar as, quote, a dictator who has centralized power, silenced dissent, and jailed political prisoners. Abiy Ahmed has not responded directly, but has criticized, quote, media owners and foreigners who are trying to sabotage his country's leap to progress. And so it is evident that there is a political dimension in these protests, which is taking advantage of ethnic disputes and tensions to place pressure on Ethiopia's new leader. So will Jawar's bid for power be successful, and at what cost? And more importantly, will the world's newest Nobel laureate surpass this critical moment and remain in power?
Hello, you're watching Eye on Africa. I'm Rochelle Harrison-Pless. Thanks for joining us. Coming up, Ethiopia's Oromia region on edge as fierce anti-government protests continue. The UN human rights body repeating its calls to send in independent observers. I'll have more from our correspondent in just a moment. The ballots are being tallied in Morocco after voters went to the polls in a parliamentary election. The moderate Islamist PJD party is hoping to hold on to power. And surf's up in Nigeria. We meet the man who's catching waves after opening the country's first ever surf school. But first up, it feels like a war zone. That's how a resident described his hometown of Adama in Ethiopia's Oromia region, which has been rocked by anti-government protests. The violence on the outskirts of Addis Ababa has seen the UN Human Rights High Commission repeat its calls for access to areas where demonstrations have erupted. Also this Friday, the Ethiopian government says that several factories and dozens of vehicles were damaged in attacks by what it called anti-peace forces. For more on this story, let's bring in France 24 correspondent Karim Lebour. Karim, a very good evening to you. Anti-government protests have really intensified in the last few days. What more can you tell us? What's the mood like there?
We intensify to the point that it's impossible to list all the incidents of the last few days because there are so many. Protesters have now turned their anger on foreigners. A tourist resort has been completely burned down south of Addis. At least 11 mainly foreign-owned factories have been set on fire in a single industrial zone outside of Addis. And foreign embassies have called their national not to go outside of Addis because they fear the weekend will be extremely tense. These protests have significantly intensified since the deadly stampede last Sunday during a religious festival in Oromia, and that was really the trigger that triggered this outburst of violence we have witnessed in the last few days.
Well, today the UN human rights body repeated its calls for access to those areas rocked by protests. It says independent observers should be allowed in. What's the likelihood of this happening?
No chance at all, really. Ethiopia has so far refused any independent investigation on any of the deadly incidents over the last year. Prime Minister Haile Mariam has repeatedly said that it's a matter of national sovereignty. And this has really angered protesters because there is absolutely no attempt to even start a dialogue on the government side. And what is happening really is, especially since the stampede last Sunday, is that the government is running the risk of completely cutting itself off from the Oromos, who are the biggest ethnic group in Ethiopia.
OK, Karim, thanks very much for bringing us up to date with that story. France 24, Karim Lebour reporting there. A brazen attack in broad daylight in Niger. 22 soldiers were killed after a group of at least 30 gunmen targeted a refugee camp in the western Tawa region. The camp is sheltering some 4,000 people from neighbouring Mali. The assailants targeted a military post near the camp, a spokesman from the country's defence ministry saying they were most likely jihadists. The attackers fled in a stolen vehicle after seizing weapons, food and medical supplies. Now, Zambia's opposition leader has pleaded not guilty to unlawful assembly and sedition charges. Hakainde Hichilema was arrested on Wednesday alongside the vice president from his United Party for National Development after they attempted to visit party members in detention. Hichilema is set to appear in court later this month and, if convicted, faces up to 7 years behind bars. Back in August, he disputed the results of the country's presidential election, which handed a narrow victory to incumbent leader Edgar Lungu. A French inquiry into events that sparked the 1994 Rwandan genocide is far from over, with judges now targeting Faustin Kayumba Nyamwasa. French investigators want to interview the former Rwandan general who fled to South Africa in 2010. Kayumba Nyamwasa has accused the country's current leader, Paul Kagame, of involvement in the assassination of President Juvenal Habyarimana, his murder igniting ethnic tensions and sparking the genocide, which saw the slaughter of some 800,000 Tutsis. Next, Moroccans went to the polls this Friday to elect a new parliament, the second time voters cast their ballots since the country ushered in constitutional reforms in 2011. The moderate Islamist Justice and Development Party, or PJD, is hoping to be re-elected to government, but its main rival, the Authenticity and Modernity Party, has thrown down a challenge. Well, for all the latest on this story, let's cross to France 24's Chris Moore, who's in Rabat for us. Chris, a good evening to you. Now, the polling stations are closed. The ballots are being tallied. We'll have first results tomorrow. Tell us how the vote went today.
Well, both the main protagonists you were talking about there saying they're largely satisfied with the way things panned out. It was in many ways portrayed as a contest between those two main protagonists, the PJD, which has carved out a niche for itself with an image as the anti-corruption party. It says the PAM is too close to the royal household. The PAM's been countering by saying that their Islamist opponents have been seeking to make society more religious, even encourage extremism. Now, in terms of turnout, the latest figure we have is from about 2 hours before the closure of polls, and we're looking at something between 30 and 40% there. Back in 2011, it was only 45%, all of that in a country where a third of potential voters are not actually on the electoral roll. So a huge part of the Moroccan potential electorate not turning out here. In terms of where we go next, we're expecting results to start coming in on Saturday. There is likely to be a protracted period of negotiation after that, however. 30 parties standing and negotiating a coalition government could take some time.
OK, Chris, thanks very much for that. France 24's Chris Small reporting from Rabat in Morocco. And finally, Nigeria may not be the first country you think of when it comes to surfing, but with hundreds of kilometres of unexplored coastline, the West African country has potential as a prime spot for surfers. At least one man thinks so. God Power Peki Puma has opened Nigeria's first ever surf school. Luke Shrego has the story.
Surf school in Nigeria's Tarkwa Bay, and everyone has to start with the basics.
Stand up. Nice.
God Power Peki Puma is not just a fan of the sport, he runs Nigeria's first surf school, having fallen in love with it when he was younger.
When I saw it, I was like, how are these people doing this? How are they standing on the board? So I just admired it the very first time when I was a kid. And I said, wow, this is really amazing. I really like to do this. I really want to learn this sport.
15 years of experience later, he decided to teach his skills to others, with mixed results. Even France 24's Rosie Collier fancied a go while she was in the area.
Tarkwa Bay, where we are, is a beautiful location in a very, very big mega city of Lagos. It's a great place to come and get away on the weekend, but rather than just lying on the beach, obviously I don't need a suntan, then I thought let me come and try some surfing and get fit in the meantime.
Lessons cost $16, $9 if you bring your own board. In fact, that's a real problem at a destination not exactly known in surfing circles.
I don't have surfboards because to get surfboard here is from South Africa and it's very expensive. It's an expensive sport to do.
Peki Puma is not shy about how he intends to gain exposure and get his hands on the gear he needs. He wants to become a member of the International Surfing Association, not just learning new skills, but one day representing his country in international events too.
That's it for now. I'll be back in 45 minutes with more African news. Stay tuned. Live from Paris continues in just a few minutes.
Whoa. Whoa.